Shadow. Struggle or strangle. Shadow, rise and fight. Another challenger. I'm best in my will. Rock your mortality tightly. Handle this. Grip of the infinite. Time bends to my will. Grasp your mortality tightly. Shadow, rise and fight. Desperate to get survival. Another round will commence as soon as I have more combatants.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my tri-attribute stacking Inquisitor version 2. I did a Guardian last league. This league I tried it with Inquisitor, and this is some build archetype I want to try to keep improving upon each league. It's something I like to do. I think it's interesting, and the idea is pretty simple. We stack all 3 attributes, and we're trying to benefit from things that you get when you stack all 3 attributes. Now, for me, that is, like, how do we get damage on this tree? Well, for example, our tree has pretty much no damage nodes on it, but we have damage from things like the Mastery, 1% per 5 of the lowest. We have 1% per 5 of Strength, which is basically the same thing. It's whatever's your lowest attribute, which they're trying to keep them pretty evenly spaced. So this is giving me pretty much the same damage that this is giving me. I also get 1% per 5 of lowest with Cyclopean Coil. Now, between all these things, I have roughly around 900 of each attribute. It's around 180% damage times 3. So it's giving us close to 600% damage from just those 3 sources. On top of that, I have 2 Cold Decors in my build. Cold Decors is 3% per, basically, or 1% per 25 of each of the respective attributes. For me, that's about 1% per 8 attributes, and or 1% per, like, so it's like, for me, it's about 100% damage is roughly what this node is giving me. And I have it twice. So all of our damage is coming from these sources, not much else, and it allows us to have a tree that's spread out doing a lot of things. On top of that, we are using the Inquisitor's Righteous Providence. That means we have roughly 902% increased crit chance. This means we pretty much cap our crit just with that attribute node alone. So we have our crit solved for in terms of crit chance. We have percent damage solved for. The only other damage scaling metrics we need are things like penetration and things like crit multi, cast speed, stuff like that. So we get penetration from Inquisitor's Inevitable Judgment. If I was to do this as a Guardian, I would have a much better time getting sustain. I'm a little bit low on regen. That's probably the weakest part of this build. I'd get more sustain doing Guardian, but I would have to solve for pen. I'd have to go for pen supports. I'd have to go for exposure. I'd maybe have to go for an additional curse, stuff like that to solve for pen. It's doable, but Inquisitor makes it easy, and that's why I tried Inquisitor this time. You'll notice I didn't end up going for Pious Path, because most of the time I am standing still while I'm attacking, which is basically just Sanctuary, so I figured I'd go for the extra damage from Augury Penitence. On top of all of this, I figured since I had a 3 max res lightning res relic, I might try to fit in myself the good old classic melding. So I have a melding jewel, and on top of that I have Trader, along with 2 empty flasks with a core scanning reuse at the end of this flask, and a bismuth with reuse at the end of this flask. These basically last close to, it's not forever, it's multiple minutes, and basically what that means is if you're going to be doing content, you're going to be doing boss, you're going to be doing mapping, these are effectively going to be permanently up. The only time these are going to go down if you go AFK for a few minutes straight. And even then, I'm not sure core skating will even go down. Core skating might just last forever. I haven't seen it go down on me yet. So that is how we are having a character that has no res, but since these are permanently up, we're at 90, 90, 90, thanks to the source of melding, plus max res from our relic, max res from our shield, and then max res from our helmets. And then we follow it up with the max rev prismatic skin anoints, as well as running Purity of Lightning in the build. Now, you can run this for maximum fire res. Instead of getting max lightning res here, you get max fire res here and max fire res here. That is something that you can do. The only reason I'm doing max lightning res is because I had a relic for max lightning res. I had a relic for max fire res, but it was only +2. So I decided to go with max lightning res. I'm just saying you have that option. If you have a max fire res relic, you can do that as well. Okay, now, going into the rest of the character, that covers the damage scaling for the most part. Survivability. How are we getting EHP? Well, once again, we're getting EHP from our attributes. Now, Shaper's Touch is great for this. It gives you, basically, we have almost 1,000 dexterity, which means we're getting almost 250 life from these gloves alone. We're getting some mana from that, which, with the Guardian Radiant Faith node, which we are stealing, we're getting a bunch of extra mana from, or a bunch of ES from that as well. And then on top of that, our strength is giving us percent energy shield scaling. So we have a decent amount of flat life we're getting from our strength and from the dex from the gloves here, as well as percent energy shield we get from int and from strength based on the gloves. And the idea is pretty simple. We have life on most of our items, and then we reserve that life, which allows us to get a huge flat ES boom bonus from Ivory Tower. You combine this with permanent uptime of Cascade and Elixir, and you don't have to worry about damage bypassing you, and you can have a good chest piece like Ivory Tower instead of a trash chest piece like Shavron's Wrappings. Now, on top of this, since we are stealing the Guardian node Radiant Faith, we also get a bunch of armor based on the life we reserve. So we're reserving close to 4,500 life. That's giving us 160% of that value as armor. So that's roughly around 7,000 flat armor. That's the reason why we have close to 80,000 armor in this build, is because we're getting so much flat armor from Radiant Faith. We don't really have much armor on our gear per se, maybe about 1,000 total between all the random pieces. Not much, but then you get another 7,000 on top of that with your life pool. You mix in the fact you have Determination and Defiance Banner, and all of a sudden you have actually a very good amount of armor. And then we also have the mastery that says, hey, if you're not on low energy shield, you defend with 20% more armor, which is basically all the time, so fizz damage doesn't usually end up being a problem. So that is what's going on there for our defenses. We have 90 max all res, 80k armor, plus 20% for most of the time, and then our weak spot right now is Chaos Res, which Chaos Res, it's 45. Granted, I could outgear this. I could get it to 75. I just started playing with 45 and never died to chaos damage, so I didn't really care to try to min-max my gear for that. And on top of all that, we do have 100% spell suppression chance. Now, you might be wondering, I only see suppression on your one shield for 10%. How do you get spell suppress cap? Well, thanks to tri-attribute stacking, we get spell suppress basically from Mage Bane. We get 1% per 15 dex, so that ends up giving us around, what is that? 15 goes into 900 about, 60 times. So we're getting about 60% spell suppress there, I think, roughly. And then we have another 10 plus 12, we have another 22 suppress just from these travel nodes as we're traveling through here anyways, and that's how we're getting spell suppress cap. It's pretty cool to have a character where we don't really invest too much in spell suppress, but we get spell suppress cap anyways, and it ends up resulting in our character being quite tanky. Having something like 90 max all res and 100% spell suppress just means spells, they just don't really hurt. They don't really do that much damage. As I said, the weakest part of this whole character comes down to the fact we are just barely over-sustaining our self-degen from Righteous Fire. You can see the second I start moving, we start to degen because I only have the conk ground while standing still. I opted for that because most of the time I'm standing still anyways. And then we have a bit of spell leech. It's good enough for basically all content. It doesn't usually end up being an issue. But if you want to go into those super hard encounters where they're going to hit you over and over and over again, the sustain needs to be a bit better in my opinion. So that is something I want to improve. Probably next time I roll around to try to make this sort of character again, I'll probably try to improve upon it once again in maybe next league. This is a character I want to revisit in the future. Ultimately, I would say it's still not polished and good enough for me to recommend it fully. I like what I did here. I went with Glacial Cascade just to try out Glacial Cascade as a skill. I think it's pretty solid, but it requires some level of positioning. You want the enemy to optimally be like right around here, so you're getting like 3 to 2 overlaps with the main final burst hitting. But since I'm not very good at playing it, sometimes I'm point blank and I'm only getting one hit with the really weak Glacial Cascade rather than the powerful final burst and yada yada yada. Ultimately, there's probably stronger skills, but this is just the one I wanted to try out, and that's what I did. This character can work with basically any skill. The only change you would need to make if you want to do a non-cold skill is swap out cold decors and start speccing your tree differently. You wouldn't go for cold decor, and that would be the only change you'd really make. You would change something out to do basically some other setup for fire, some other setup for a lightning skill, or if you're doing a fizz based skill, you probably would have to drop Shaper's Touch to get fizz conversion gloves, and you might have to figure out how to get a cold mastery. Maybe you'd have to take this cold mastery for conversion, something like that. Or you'd have to do a hatred conversion mastery type of thing. Alrighty. I'm gonna go ahead and give you guys a showcase of what it looks like doing in Veritania, just a regular mapping, just to give you an idea of what the character looks like while playing just sort of normal content. As you may be able to tell, I'm a bit sick here. Hopefully I've explained the build somewhat well. This is my second time doing this, version 2, and I'm trying to improve on what I did on the previous version. So while mapping, it's basically just what Glacial... With this Gore MTX of Glacial Cascade, it kind of feels like we're playing old Sunder a little bit, because you just start hammering down, right? And it just kind of looks like it looks a little bit like Sunder to me, or just because of this MTX, which I think is kind of funny. But it is actually a cold skill, even though it looks like that. That's just the Gore MTX. I'll show you what it looks like without the Gore MTX real quick here. If we do, where is it? There it is. If we aren't doing the Gore MTX, this is what it normally looks like. This is just Glacial Cascade by default right here. Alrighty. So this is kind of what it looks like on a normal mapping scenario. I have Val Haste, which I normally forget about it most of the time, but usually what I'll do is if I do remember, I'll proc it on like a boss or something. Like a boss is coming up here, I'll be like, oh, boss here. Then I'll go and I'll do Glacial Cascade for the boss or whatever, or Val Haste for the boss. Granted, I probably should have saved it for Veritania, but I'm not sure it really matters. So we'll do this, and that's what it looks like doing a normal Guardian. It's pretty chill. For the most part, there's not many things in the game that can touch this character damage-wise. The Ubers can. I tested it on things like the Sears Meteor. We can tank that pretty consistently if we do Molten Shell and Frost Shield. Stuff like the Maven Memory game we can't tank. I thought it was a spell. Turns out it's not a spell, so our spell suppress doesn't work on the Maven Memory game for the Uber version. We can tank the ball phase of Exarch decently. We still have to dodge some of them or play it a little bit well, but for the most part you can tank like 6, 7, 8 balls in a row, and that means there's a lot of forgiveness in that sort of situation. I don't know how well it tanks the Uber Eater of Worlds. I can't really remember. I did that fight like a couple days ago, and I want to say no to tanking the Uber super slam thing it does when you're trying to do those Orby things. I kind of forget what it's called, but from what my memory tells me is I had too much issue with my sustain being not good enough during the phase to proc the balls to make the slam go off or whatever. Anyways, point is, the character overall is super tanky. I did all the Ubers on it, but it's still not really perfectly there the way I want it to be. I'm gonna probably do a couple things on the notes section to explain how I crafted my shield, my wand, and my amulet, because those are the hard to craft pieces of gear. Everything else is relatively straightforward stuff of like essence spamming and getting fractured items, pretty much. Nothing too crazy there. But I'll have a little bit of notes for the shield, the amulet, and the wand, just because I think there's a little bit of tricks you can do to get guaranteed certain mods, and these, although they look really good, are not as hard as they might look, except for the amulet. The amulet is absolute hell. I'm not going to recommend crafting the amulet the way I did, in terms of you don't need to min-max your amulet this much. This is something where I was being stupid and I gave Twitch chat the option to say, hey, vote on what level of amulet you want me to craft, and they of course voted on me crafting the best possible version of the amulet, which involved me torturing myself. But anyways, point is, hopefully you enjoy the character. And until next time, I will see you guys later. Take care, Exiles, and peace out.